Hello and welcome to our July Movement Cafe. And our topic today is heat and what that means in congregations and just in community in general, what it means for human bodies and other kinds of things that are just part of what a faithful conversation might look like. Your cafe team, if you need anything, is Kathy Velasquez Eberhardt and Don Lewis. Don, I don't know if you want to change your cafe host name or not, but she's also listed as cafe host because that's a very important Zoom channel for us and very much part of sort of our effort and how we do things. So my name is Reverend Rashenda Fairhurst, and I live in Southern Oregon. And I'm an earth keeper and part of the Movement Cafe team. Please introduce yourself in the chat and let us know, you can let us know around this topic as well. What has heat meant in your community and what kinds of things that maybe you're curious about or here to listen for or anything like that. And I want to see people keep rolling in. I don't want to move to Kathy too early because I want to make sure we have folks coming in, but I think I will. Kathy, can you tell us a little bit about what is this crazy and wonderful thing called the United Methodist Creation Justice Movement?
Thanks, Rashinda. Welcome, everyone. Greetings from Minnesota. I'm Kathy Velasquez Eberhardt. I'm a United Methodist layperson and a commissioned Global Ministries Earth Keeper, and one of many of the leaders, some of who are here, who have helped bring the Creation Justice Movement into being. As many of you know, the United Methodist Church has a long history of affirming a strong vocation of creation justice that calls all of us as Christians to live in just relationship with God's good creation. However, as the climate is changing, as we're seeing increased environmental injustices and biodiversity loss and ecological destruction, we've been increased urgency to take action. And so as folks started to meet each other at different conferences or at Earth Keepers trainings, we realized there was more that we could be doing. And so about 5 years ago, this thing called the Creation Justice Movement of the United Methodist Church was launched. Last month, we actually celebrated that a bit if you wanted to go back and see a bit more about what we've been doing the last 5 years. But in short, we have a number of work teams that are addressing elements of work that we can be doing together within the church around advocacy or worship, organizing within our annual conferences. We have a solar team. There's a fossil-free kind of divestment group and our communications team. In many ways, this topic today came out of our conversations in our communications team, that as we thought about which topic to focus on for our newsletter in this summer, it seemed logical to be focusing in on something that is an issue for many of us during summer months, and that is the topic of heat and increasingly air quality. And so I'm really excited to have this conversation today and the folks that are here to join us to lead us in that conversation, to think about how our congregations and communities might address that, how we might support each other. And just on a personal note, here in Minnesota, you might think that heat isn't our issue, but we did just get through a heat wave and we have really high humidity. And we've also been increasingly having Canadian wildfire smoke. And so even when the weather is nice, we often can't be outside or have our windows open. And so even though all of these challenges are happening, I'm just especially grateful to be exploring solutions with all of you. So turn it back to you, Rashina. Thank you all for being here.
That's wonderful. So we're going to begin with a prayer today. When we had our planning session for this particular cafe, many of us came with heavy hearts, and we know there is heaviness now, always. So I begin with a prayer. As we enter into this conversation today, we are mindful that a spending bill recently passed in Congress that will strike Medicare and food assistance that many adults, children, and families rely on. The bill imperils rural hospitals and access to health care, supercharges violent seizures of peaceful immigrants, and dismantles climate and health programs and policies designed to save millions of lives. Reverend William Barber and others were recently arrested in Washington, D.C. as they lifted prayers naming the cruelty in this bill. And this is an excerpt of that prayer. Against the conspiracy of cruelty, we plead the power of your mercy. Here we are, O God, because we have heard the cries of your people who are already hard-pressed and unable to meet their basic needs. We have also heard the confessions of people who suffer from the alienation that greed plants in the human soul. Deliver us, Lord, from the deceptive lie that says our nation will be better off if those who have little get less and those who have too much get more. God, we have too often confused ill-gotten gain with your blessings. We have praised success that came at a cost to the vulnerable and worshiped wealth built by taking from the poor and working people. We have come to confess the ways that we have been too quiet for too long while far too many suffered, and we repent of the ways we've allowed the language of our symbols of faith to prop up abuses of power. We pray this not only for the sake of those who suffer most, but also for those who will wrongfully believe that this immoral budget will benefit them. Teach us again, O God, how we are many from many one, and that we cannot become the more perfect union you've called us to be unless we lift from the bottom so everyone can rise. Amen. We are next going to talk together about what a shared language of ability and disability could look like and how we can share that together today. And so I turn to Angela Molloy to share that with us. Go ahead, Angela.
Thank you, Rashenda. So friends, we're going to begin today with an overview of language so that we can respectfully engage with one another moving forward, and also as we bring our learnings back to the communities we serve. Language surrounding disability is complex and multifaceted. This aspect of identity is still overtly stigmatized by our society. And so in discussing disability, the most general guideline is to ask disabled people about their language preferences and to follow their lead in the same way that it's a common sign of respect to ask people what their pronouns are. There are two commonly referred to types of language that people in the disability community tend to use: person-first language and identity-first language. So person-first language emphasizes the person before their disability, like saying a person with a disability or a person using a mobility aid. Identity-first language, on the other hand, puts the disability first in the description, like when saying disabled person or they are autistic. This type of language recognizes disability as another expected marker of identity, just like race, gender, age, or sexual orientation. As a faith leader disabled from birth, I intentionally use identity-first language to push back against ingrained stereotypes. Because my disabled body is all I've ever known. It's messy, complicated, and good. So as you move through this cafe, I encourage you to be open to a new perspective, seeing disability as another beautiful facet of identity, one which improves our world and our relationships if only we're open to continued learning. It might be tempting to use well-intentioned language when talking about disabled people, like perhaps you've heard or used terms like special needs, differently abled, or handy-capable in the past. These euphemisms attempt to soften the perceived blow of the term disabled, doing everything possible to not say that word for fear of the implications. Because we as a society and as an institutional church have mostly learned not to use discriminatory or infantilizing monikers for other identities, but for some reason we still really struggle with that around disability. Beloveds, language matters. This July is Disability Pride Month. If you have questions about language, history, etiquette, or why people might understand their disabilities as an identity to be proud of, feel free to reach out. But for now, in our time together, we ask that you try to be intentional with your language, recognizing that disability is not a bad word. Disabled people are disproportionately impacted by climate change and heat. And fearing the word disabled is not the solution, because disabled bodies are not the problem. The problem is the policies which enact violence on some bodies more than others. and we have to work as accomplices with disabled people in our communities to resist these oppressive actions. Being deliberate with our language is an easy first step towards tangible change.
Thank you, Angela. Very much appreciate our opening with some shared wisdom to draw upon us. I'm really glad to be a learner in this space. Next, I want to turn to Cynthia Astle, and I want to offer a quick introduction, but the full introduction will be in the chat. So Cynthia Astle is a longtime religion journalist and editor and founder of United Methodist Insight, which is so fantastic, an online journal she began in 2011 as a media channel to amplify news and views for, by, and about marginalized and underserved United Methodists. She is an award-winning journalist, and I'm going to turn it over to her so we can hear from her. And like I say, her full bio is in the chat. Go ahead, Cynthia. So glad you're here.
Thank you, Rishenda. I'm delighted to be here. And I very much appreciate what Angela just said, because as a wordsmith, I understand the power of words. And so I'll do my best to follow the guidelines that were agreed upon. Forgive me if I slip. Our task today is to look at heat and its implications for health. Not only heat, but air quality is another factor. And I grew up in Florida, and I live in Texas. So I've experienced heat and sometimes excessive heat all my life. 5 years ago, when it was first begun, there was another sort of grassroots organization among journalists that was founded by the Columbia Journalism Review and The Nation magazine, and it's called Covering Climate Now. And it is now a worldwide collaboration of some 600 news outlets that are committed to enhanced reporting on the climate crisis. And if I may be permitted a moment of pride, I'm proud to say that United Methodist Insight was one of the earliest members of CCN, and that we are, I believe, one of the only faith-based journals to be addressing this issue. What really made the climate crisis personal for me came 2 years ago. I wanted to attend the installation service of Sally Vonner, who is a friend of mine. I've known Sally for about 30 years. And she chose to have her installation as the top executive of United Women in Faith here in Dallas, where she came from. And so it was an incredibly hot day, but I was determined to go. And I got in my car and I drove about 2 miles from home, and I looked at the outside temperature on the dashboard, and it said it was 102. And I was already feeling the effects of the heat, and I began to have some shortness of breath, a little dizziness. And I thought to myself that if I couldn't get a handicap space close enough to the Lover's Lane Church where the service was, I would have to walk across an asphalt parking lot where the temperature was likely to be as much as 10 degrees warmer. And it occurred to me in that moment that if I fainted in that heat, that nobody would find me until the service was over, and I might actually die. I have diabetes, and I have 2 disabilities in my back that require me to use mobility assistance. And in that moment of realization, I turned my car around and I went home. And I watched the service on the live stream. And ever since then, I have been acutely aware of the fact that I am in 2 categories that are susceptible to excessive heat. I have disabling conditions, And I am also now, it's hard to think of myself like this, but I'm considered elderly. Believe it or not, I'm in my 70s, and this is my natural hair color. I do not dye my hair. And those folks who are in those two categories are among those who are most vulnerable, not just to excessive heat, but to heat in general. And so I began collecting some information when I was asked to join this group. And I'm going to share my screen now, and we're going to go through these slides briefly. This is a quote from a book called The Heat Will Kill You First: Life and Death on a Scorching Planet by Jeff Goodall, who's an exceptional journalist. When heat comes, it's invisible. It doesn't bend tree branches or blow hair across your face to let you know it's arrived. The ground doesn't shake. It just surrounds you and works on you in ways you can't anticipate or control. You sweat. Your heart races. You're thirsty. Your vision blurs. The sun feels like the barrel of a gun pointed at you. Plants look like they're crying. Birds vanish from the sky and take refuge in deep shade. Cars are untouchable. Colors fade. The air smells burned. You can imagine fire before you see it. This is some of the sensual effects of heat. These most slides are mostly from a wonderful resource called Climate Central. This map shows the amount of summer warming since 1970. And you can see the locations where warming has been most acute. You would expect to see it down here in the Southwest, near where I live in Dallas, Texas. But look at some of these other places that are unexpected. Look up here how deep it is in the Pacific Northwest and along the coast here and the urban corridor. These are real temperatures. These signify an increase in the average summer temperature of from 1 to 5 degrees. Another major factor is the fact that summer nights are warmer. If it doesn't cool down at night, nobody can rest. This chart shows how much the summer night temperatures have grown in Anniston, Alabama since 1970. That's a 2-degree increase. Of particular interest to churches when we have events in the summer are the effects of extreme heat on children. You can see for yourself, babies can't regulate their temperature or their hydration. Child athletes can get heat illness very easily. Students can't concentrate. They can't learn. This next slide shows how much students in Birmingham, Alabama have suffered from the heat in the public school, kindergarten through 12th grade. That's an amazing statistic. 16,000 plus students feel 8 degrees hotter because of global warming. Expectant mothers are also at great risk in excessive heat. They could have premature babies. They could have stillbirths. The babies may not grow as well. The mothers themselves can experience high blood pressure and gestational diabetes. There are more maternal hospitalizations and more mothers who die as a result of excessive heat. Here is projection from climate scientists that shows how many yearly heat-related deaths are going to increase by the year 2100 if we don't cut our emissions from fossil fuels. This is most astounding to me when I look at this map and see the increase in Montana, of all places. This shows that Montana is likely to have 700 yearly heat-related deaths by 2100 if we don't get ourselves off fossil fuels. Now, these are alarming statistics. And statistics can sometimes put us in a position where we become paralyzed and we don't know what to do. But I know that we're soon going to talk about what some of the solutions and hopeful alternatives are. And so, Rashenda, I think I'm ready to give it back to you. I hope I'm on time. And if so, we'll get a little more time for some of the other presentations that I'm looking forward to. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. Yes, and that personal story, I think we've all had that experience of like it like how do I navigate this? And we all often talk in terms of deaths and for statistics, which I think is really helpful, but this does not even cover like all the injuries and hospitalizations and the way we have to reorder things in order to be present for our community.
My being out in the world these days, I usually don't go out if the temperature's above 90 degrees. If I do go out, I always carry with me water and sweatbands and a hand fan. My life has been totally altered by the need to adapt to excessive heat where I live.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and where we serve, this is true also. So I want to turn next to Angela Molloy. And like I did with Cynthia, I'm going to offer a very brief introduction, and the rest of that will be in the chat. I want to turn this over to Angela. She, her is a congenitally disabled fifth-generation Methodist, a second-year PhD student, and chair of the Greater Northwest Area Disability Ministries Committee. And Angela, I want to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. Okay, friends, so we are coming up next week on the 35th anniversary of the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, landmark legislation which took decades of activism to pass and which is currently, like so many other things, under attack. What you might not know is that in the years leading up to 1990, churches advocated aggressively for exemption from the ADA, and they were successful. Our churches are not required to be accessible for disabled people still. And I can't help but see parallels in the way that the religious right is opposing climate regulations today. Access needs to be at the center of every policy we make, because providing access in our justice work is not a zero-sum game. When we prioritize the most vulnerable, there is still room. Investing in climate justice in a way that intersectionally centers disabled people equips us to live into our values as a connectional church where all belong. But it also creates the infrastructure and the policies that will ultimately benefit everyone. 1 in 4 people in our country are disabled, and with the aging demographics of our congregations, this number is even higher. If we are lucky to live long enough, we will all become disabled. People who live with autoimmune diseases, neurological and thyroid disorders, those who use mobility aids like wheelchairs, and disabled folks taking a wide variety of medications are more likely to experience heat intolerance. Symptoms of heat intolerance may include fatigue, dizziness, skin sensitivity, weakness, nausea, feeling faint, and also experiencing pain flare-ups. Wheelchair users are impacted by the rising temperatures because the color and the material composition of their wheelchairs regularly absorb heat. People with mobility disabilities like spinal cord injuries often lose their ability to sweat, which is a major problem with rising temperatures, since sweat is our body's primary way of shedding heat. My own disabilities impact my ability to regulate my body temperature, which causes me to have higher daily pain levels during the summer and to regularly feel faint. In addition, as we age, we lose our ability to regulate our body temperature, making many older beloveds in our communities more susceptible to heat stroke. Poor air quality from climate-related fires causes exponential harm for people living with asthma, lung disease, long COVID, and more. Disabled people are already at higher risk of being underemployed and underhoused, making it more challenging to escape the disproportionately dangerous heat and smoke. Too often living in poverty because of laws limiting assets and access to marriage for disabled people, and because it's still legal at the federal level to pay disabled people less than minimum wage. Disabled people do not always have access to air conditioning or other cool environments in the summer. Climate crises hit hardest for those who are already marginalized. Disabled people, people of color, queer and trans people, elderly people, and those facing a range of other inequalities are impacted most by climate disasters. Now, disabled people are already used to living in a world that wasn't built for our body, mind, spirits. But as Rabbi Julia Watts-Belser reminds us, the structural barriers we face every day, hostile architecture, meager public services, shoddy public transportation systems, failures to ensure communication access, bureaucratic tangles for basic life needs, become even more deadly during disaster. Beloveds, too often our practices, policies, and principles fail to align. And we need to do all in our power in collaboration with people of diverse body, mind, spirits to rectify that failure. We should care about those most at risk of harm and do everything we can to reduce the climate-related violence they face, because that is the kingdom work to which we're called. With the exorbitant cuts to Medicaid, the rollback of environmental protections, and the systematic dismantling of the federal health department from Trump's ugly bill, churches can and must lean into our justice-driven values to help fill the gaps. Care must be taken, though, to ensure that we do not unintentionally echo the same harmful talking points. The eugenic-riddled Make America Healthy Again report, released in May, for instance, talks about pollution and air quality as a problem only because the report falsely claims that they cause autism. Let me be clear, they do not, and autism is not a moral failing like Christian nationalism and the current political administration are trying to make it out to be. The death rate for disabled people in many climate change-caused disasters is more than double the rate of non-disabled people. Heat, pollution, and poor air quality caused by climate change do exponential harm to disabled people. We need to be clear about that. Rising temperature is, like war and famine, a mass disabling event that is within our power to reduce. And still, we have to be cautious, because as much as we can and should take action to resist androgenic climate change by centering the experiences of those most impacted and by promoting the flourishing of all human and more than human beings, we shouldn't be motivated by a fear of ourselves or our loved ones becoming disabled. Disability is not a punishment or a tragedy, and it isn't something to be avoided at all costs. For many people, disability is an identity, and we ought to do everything we can to ensure disabled people are able to thrive in all aspects of life. As the Disability Justice Collective Sins Invalid critically notes, there is no climate justice if disability justice is not factored in. Intersectional justice requires that we respect one another's wisdom, recognize the image of God in our diverse body minds, rejoice in our interdependence, and reject all life-limiting policies. So in this spirit of sustainability and interdependence, I want to end this portion of my talk with a poem by Naomi Ortiz in their fabulous book, Rituals for Climate Change, a Crip Struggle for Eco-Justice. They write, "Disability is the embodiment of living multiple truths at once. It is the description of the ever-changing direction of the wind, nimble focus to which way one screams the loudest. It is both under-stimulation and overstimulation, not being touched for years and being touched too often without permission. It is the identity that in others' eyes overrules all of our other identities, even being poor. Welcome to the equal playing field of the fear of vulnerability. It is living in everyone's expectation that if they try at access, at niceness, then that trying for us should be enough. Slivers of doubt become trusted tools. Can I do this? Will they be there? Is there space for the tides change of my shifting needs? Be prepared for anything. Be prepared for anything. Unclenching my hypervigilance allows me to unfold my resting blanket of empathy. Many people rest here for a time. There is safety with the one who doesn't belong. What they don't realize is that there is so much power in discovering how to not need to belong. It is a gift to understand that you can never fit in, and a gift to name for others that universal feeling of never fitting in. Disability is a forced exploration of every system man has created to help those who can't function in the capitalist system, or who need medical access, or who need help in their home, or for whom being in love is deemed inappropriate. Systematic excavation. We learn secret ways through concealed tunnels. We learn to be silent and to take what we can find. Disability is living multiple levels at once. Awareness, vulnerability, empathy, humor, anger, focus, creativity. It takes planning for me to be here. Embracing sustainable instead of healthy as the label of betterment. It is a hard task, asking what will keep one going in a way that keeps giving. I don't count on anyone being comfortable around me, except maybe disabled people, and then only sometimes. We've convinced ourselves that disability is something we should peel off, keep hidden in a box, even those who have no hope of hiding. We are taught that to acknowledge our complexity is to ask to be excluded. It takes years to learn that this is their biggest mistake, that in our complexity lies our greatest strength, claiming it can revolutionize the world. Weaving disability as part of the revolutionary fabric of being a more human being. It is a spherical bridge to everyone alive. Beloveds, our complexity, our interconnection, our sustainability is our greatest strength. May we allow it to revolutionize the world.
I feel like that needs an amen at the end. That felt like combination prayer, lament, the book of Angela. That was wonderful. And makes me think too of like the creation story, right? We're so ableist. You take a look at those pictures that depict creation, and all these animals are like in the prime of their lives, running around. It's like, this imagination of what is complete to God is different than what we perceive as perfect in ourselves. And I think we need to really, really think about that. And the other two words that I want to pull out from Angela's wonderful talk is this idea of what is hostile architecture. This was a new set of words for me just like 2 years ago. And hostile architecture, an awareness of what that means in our churches, I think will be a really big help in doing this work. I want to now turn to Ashley Ward, who is with us today. And again, I'm going to offer this little tiny snippet of all this wonderful work that Ashley is doing. And so Dr. Ashley Ward is a climate health and resilience professional Her career has focused on engaging communities to identify and address issues related to climate change and helping communities develop long-term sustainable strategies relevant to their community's needs. She's previously worked with NOAA in the Carolinas and the Carolinas RISA team. Am I correct? Is that RISA, all capital, connected rural and urban communities and policy decision makers with relevant climate and health data. And she is at Duke, director of the Heat Policy Innovation Hub. And we're so glad she's here. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Ashley.
Thank you so much. And Angela, wow, what powerful words you had to say. So what I'm about to say is, not quite as inspirational and powerful. But thank you all. It is a real joy to be here. I've learned so much already just in this few minutes this morning. And I've spent most of my career working at the intersection of climate health and community resilience. But what has been most moving and what I'd like to focus on today with all of you is, especially this past year, been walking alongside faith leaders who are living this reality every day and navigating how to care for the communities that they serve as the world around them, as Cynthia pointed out, gets hotter and more unequal. I also want to thank you, Cynthia, for pointing out the impact of overnight temperatures. My own research and that of many other scholars shows increasingly that overnight temperatures actually even have a bigger impact on health outcomes than those, extraordinary daytime temperatures. And showing those maps where you see the mortality, note that those are areas that are not historically hot. And this is because in a lot of ways, people don't have access to air conditioning, not properly acclimatized. So I really appreciate you pointing that out. Often those two things are not part of the conversation and something that we should keep talking about. So I began my career at NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, working very closely with communities, bringing together scientists and policymakers with the communities to help them address challenges associated with extreme events. And heat was my specialty area. So I spent a lot of time at stoplights and washing my hair, thinking about the health and economic impacts of heat and how to translate that research into policymakers. For policymakers at every jurisdictional level. We advocate strongly that we think about both how heat impacts our lives, but also our livelihoods. I mean, we have to think about both. It's impossible to buy medication, for example, if you don't have a job to do so, or your job puts you in danger and you can't work because it's too hot. And so at the Heat Policy Innovation Hub, we focus on facilitating this multi-sectoral collaboration on extreme heat. So in addition to our research on the impacts of heat to our health and well-being, we work to innovate on how leaders can help their communities mitigate the impact of heat. There is no one sector that owns this problem or issue. It is up to leaders in both the private and the public sector, communities, civil society, and increasingly in faith communities have become a very powerful part of this conversation. And so that's what I really want to focus on today, and share with you about a project that we're wrapping up now that focuses on faith communities. I have a few photos that I'm going to scroll through just because you don't have to just look at my face the whole time. These are from a recent event that we did with our Cooling Communities project. And this project is grounded in a very simple but powerful idea, and that is that churches, particularly in rural and under-resourced areas, are not just places of worship. They are, in fact, anchors, bridges, first responders, and perhaps most importantly, they are trusted. And as the planet warms, churches are becoming lifelines. Extreme heat is now the deadliest weather-related hazard in the U.S., more deadly than floods, fires, hurricanes, and the burden is not equal. It hits hardest where air conditioning is rare, where homes are poorly insulated, where chronic illnesses are high, and where people are already on the margins. In rural areas, most people would be surprised to know that we focus a lot on the urban heat island. That's great. We should. It's important. But when we look at who gets sick and who dies from heat, rural areas often have higher heat-related illness rates and mortality than urban areas. And so in rural areas, especially for this project along the I-95 corridor in North and South Carolina, many communities face what's called energy poverty. They can't afford to cool their homes, even if they have air conditioning, or maybe their buildings aren't equipped for that. Their homes aren't equipped for it. So in these places, churches are often one of the few consistent institutions that remain. During that heat wave, a church down the road with a fellowship hall with a few working AC units, it might be the only safe space for miles. So through the Cooling Community Project, we spoke with clergy, and you see them all here in this workshop that we hosted for a few days at Duke Divinity. We spoke with clergy from small towns and rural communities and the outskirts of cities, some of them full-time, some of them bivocational. We talked to them about what heat looks like in their communities and what role their churches play. And we heard pain, and we also heard purpose. And many were already responding, offering water, making wellness calls, passing out fans, but doing so without formal plans or dedicated funding or clear guidance. And their message to us, though, was clear. We want help, and we need to know how. One faith leader that we talked to gave the anecdote that they served 95 families the prior week at their food pantry, but now the heat is so bad that people can't sit in their cars to get their food without getting sick. Others said they had space like unused buildings or classrooms or sanctuaries, but they lacked volunteers or supplies or even clarity about what a cooling center really is. We also heard a spiritual thread throughout. Many clergy saw this as deeply connected to their calling. They spoke of the gospel mandate to serve the least of these, of caring for the neighbor, and of the heat crisis as a justice issue, one that is physical and economic and moral. I'm going to switch over and stop sharing my screen for just a moment and switch over to a short video that shows how congregations are showing up for their neighbors during heat emergencies, often with few resources, but an awful lot of heart. It's a powerful snapshot of what faith-based climate justice can look like. So I'm going to reshare my screen, and hopefully you all can hear the volume of this video. Sometimes I have an issue with that. So somebody speak up if you can't hear it. Extreme heat kills more people than any other weather-related event.
No matter where you live, we are all being impacted by the changing climate. And so we have to begin to work together to find some meaningful solutions.
How can faith communities partner with the civil society and the private sector to develop strategies, interventions to protect their communities from extreme heat?
Everyone has the right and deserves the right to be able to be in a healthy environment, especially when you're in your home, your kingdom, your sanctuary.
The message that I'm bringing back to the church is that there's hope, that there's unity, that there's solidarity, and that we have the support of this university, science, data, and all of the things that we often lack in our communities.
So that has been a really wonderful project that we did in partnership with the North Carolina and South Carolina Interfaith Power and Light and the Divinity School at Duke. And, you know, we spent the last year working with these churches. They're already doing the work in many cases. What they often need is recognition and support and the tools to take it further. In response to those conversations and the work that they did with the Divinity School students, they developed a suite of resources by and for faith communities and what we're calling When Faith Meets the Heat. These resources include theological reflections on stewardship and climate justice, Bible studies and small group guides, heat-themed liturgy and prayers for worship, and policy advocacy tools for those that are ready to speak up, practical guides for running simple cooling programs right down to signs, checklists, snacks, so on and so forth. So these aren't about turning necessarily churches into emergency shelters overnight. And I want to be clear about that. They're about meeting each church where they are and giving them faithful, realistic ways to serve. And because for many of these congregations, it really isn't if they will step up or act, it's how. And so we're wrapping up these resources right now, and they're undergoing review for our comms team, which is, you know, the standard organizational things. We hope to have them out very soon, certainly next month. But I think there's a deeper point here, and that is that churches are already acting as informal resilience hubs. They're already bundling services like food and housing referrals and counseling, and now increasingly access to cooling, whether they're helping people pay their energy bills. When I worked in the field with NOAA, I can't tell you how many times I heard people talk about rationing their energy so that they could either pay for their cooling or medicine or food, which is just such a moral problem. But I believe it's time that we name this work that churches are already doing for what it is, which is actual public health infrastructure. And it's time for policy and philanthropy and emergency planning to catch up. And what that means for me is investing in HVAC upgrades and generator support for rural congregations. We are currently the next step of this Cooling Community Project. We've received a grant from the Rockefeller Foundation, and we're building out a community lighthouse network in the Carolinas, something we modeled off of the New Orleans network, and hoping that and for those of you who are not familiar with community lighthouses, the concept behind that is equipping churches with solar panels and battery backup so that they can be available for people for cooling, but also that network in New Orleans has provided things like refrigeration so people can bring their medicine. We also talk about what am I thinking about? Equipment that can be rented or basically checked out like a library, not rented. Portable solar generators and portable air conditioning units. And so we're partnering with Neil Bernard, who you saw in the video, and building out what that looks like here in the Carolinas. We are already in talks with people nationwide about how we can set up the organizational infrastructure that can easily be translated everywhere else, which includes the financing and funding to support it. We're in contact with not only through the Rockefeller Foundation, with other major foundations, and also green banks and other financing and investment bankers. So, the financing part of this is a really important part of it. It also includes training volunteers in heat illness response, creating formal partnerships with churches and their local government, and valuing clergy as not just spiritual leaders, but as actual climate responders. And so I think I want to close with this is to say that when we think about climate resilience, it's really easy to think about the technical part of it, the grids, the codes, the alert systems. But real resilience is about relationships. And the church is built for this. It is built on compassion, on proximity, on a theology that says every body is sacred and no one is expendable. And so in this time when federal funds are being cut and communities are feeling forgotten, faith communities are still there. They're still singing and serving and cooling people down and comforting people. They're doing all the same things they've always done. And so my invitation when I'm in these spaces is not just to prepare for the next heat wave, or the next heat season. It's to reimagine ministry in a warming world and to see that responding to climate risk, that can be an act of faith and hope and love in and of itself. And so we're working carefully with these partners, and I'm happy to share with you all the resources that they get developed, information about how you can plug into the work that we're doing. And happy to answer any questions to talk more about this. But thank you so much for your time today. It's really been an honor to be here and speak with you.
Thank you so much, Ashley. I'm mindful that one of the things that the United Methodist Church did as a body in 2024 in North Carolina was to say that every annual conference, which is sometimes one state, sometimes a couple of states, shall have a caretaker of God's creation as part of their conference staff, whether it's a volunteer position or a paid position. And I'm immediately thinking about how this cohort, having these cohorts to connect with kinds of work that you're doing, this is so many people draw inspiration from the Community Lighthouse Project, which is a model nationally, internationally. How do we, I've heard the term scale up before, which seems to benefit bankers and things like that. I like the term scale across, which acknowledges that we live in different places and have different experiences with perhaps similar things, the heat coming down, the sun shining down, but we have different contexts where that's something that has to be met differently. And so scaling these things across caretaker to caretaker to caretaker, conference to conference, state to state, church to church, I think there's so much we can do there. And so you're right at the center of that. So thank you. Thank you for doing this work and for all you're drawing out of it to share. Much appreciated. So we've talked a lot about really heavy things. Woo! Starting with a real heavy prayer and talking about hope, even as we are also thinking of that oppression of heat. And let's talk a little bit more about hope, places where we can see where there's some ideas ahead, things maybe we can do, getting our thinking and our hearts going. And I want to go back to return to Cynthia for a few minutes, and she's going to share a little bit about where she sees hope or what kinds of things she sees that can be done. Go ahead, Cynthia.
Thank you, Rashenda. And I want to thank Ashley because she practically gave my talk for me in terms of where do we see hope. Because I had collected some information about how a church can be a cooling center. But where I see the hope is that, first of all, is for people to become more climate aware. It's not just the fact that, oh my gosh, it's hot. It's the awareness that heat is a public health issue, and that there are things that you can do for yourself. For instance, if I can share my screen one more time, I have one more slide that can address some of this, and it's this one. If you, like me, have disability issues that affect your ability to withstand heat, then make a heat action plan. And not just for yourself, but with anybody that you know. You can stay cool. You can check the air quality. Drink water. Water has become my best friend. I drink a lot of it. Know when the symptoms are that you're being bothered by the heat, that you're reacting to it. If I had not responded to the symptoms that I felt on that day when I wanted to go to Sally's installation service, I might not be here now, seriously, at the extreme. If you've got medications like I do that have to be refrigerated, there are some things on the market that you can put in your freezer. And when you have travel or that sort of thing, you can take them out, put your medications in them, and they will travel with you successfully. The idea behind all of this is that, pardon me, my cursor's, there we go. The idea behind all of it is that while we can't control the weather, we can manage our response to it. And knowing that we have some ability to manage our own responses on an individual and a family and even a community level is something that can give us hope that while the big issues are being addressed, we will be making it through whatever the situation can be. And that's one of the biggest suggestions that I can have about how to have hope, is to start with education. Because the more you know, the better you can act. And so that's my best suggestion for where the hope is. And stick with your community. I have been a United Methodist almost all my life, and I simply cannot imagine how people make it through their days without a community behind them. And so in terms of where we are right now, the more that we can do to build community and hospitality, the better we will all be.
And all it really takes is for us to talk about this a little more, to hear each other's stories, because I think all of us have a story of ability and disability because it mixes together. We are all both. I don't know if that's if that's correct, Angela, if I should say it like that. What I'm trying to say is that our empathy and our ability to live as people is everything that humans are, regardless of who we are. So, but I'm going to turn it over to Angela anyway, because again, with words of hope, I want to invite Angela to share. Go ahead, Angela.
Thank you so much. And I want to thank you, Ashley and Cynthia, for offering these windows of hope, of knowing that bigger isn't necessarily better, but that small intentional steps in community really do matter. Friends, nothing about us without us is a phrase used by disability rights activists, particularly in the years leading up to the ADA, that was meant to emphasize how disabled and otherwise marginalized communities need to be involved in the planning, the strategies, and the policies that will impact our lives, rather than having other people assume that they know our bodies and our needs better than we do. Disability justice activists have transformed that motto into nothing without us, period, because disabled people belong in every decision-making space and have valuable wisdom to share. Yet far too often, disabled people are left out of the climate justice conversation. I'm grateful for this space that's trying to push back against that tendency. Often when churches do prioritize climate justice, they fail to do so in a way that also prioritizes disabled people. Leaders talk about competing priorities as they worry about cost and about where to invest money first. When disabled people are left out of our practices and our conversations, policies will inevitably exist that do not meet our needs. Because the climate justice movement is still relatively new in our churches, many of our congregations do not have existing policies and programs. So we must encourage our congregations to consider disability justice alongside climate justice and build in access from the start. One church that I have the pleasure of working with holds anti-ableism and environmental stewardship as two of their core values. Rather than thinking about these two things as contradicting one another, this church uses funding to bring forward both goals in communication with the most impacted by looking at practices that will benefit them, and rather than fearing having multiple priorities or presuming that they know best for those who are most impacted. My favorite small example of how this shows up for them is in their communion practice, where they use glass cups and homemade hypoallergenic bread baked together in community, naming within their liturgy every week that anti-ableism and climate justice are priorities for them. These priorities don't contradict each other, but rather allow for all people to flourish as part of the body of Christ together. Knowing that many of our churches are not physically accessible because they're not required to be, we need to think creatively about supporting those who are most impacted by the heat. Knowing that disabled people face economic disparities that impact access to resources like air conditioning and reliable transportation. When planning for extreme heat, congregations can consider serving as a cooling center, like Ashley talked about, or offering a transportation network. But you must make sure that the spaces you're using are physically accessible. That means, for instance, that you shouldn't use an upstairs fellowship area if it means that folks must be able to climb the stairs to get there. As disabled scholar Marlena Chertok notes, disabled people often have to create workarounds, design our own solutions, be our own advocates, and that requires resilience, something the climate action justice movement is increasingly calling for. Disability teaches us to relate to ourselves, to one another, and to the world in creative and interconnected ways that promote sustainability, invite us to slow down, and remind us that we're valuable because of who and whose we are, not because of what we accomplish or produce. So I invite you to acknowledge the wisdom of disabled people in your communities, to presume competence, and to follow their lead.
Thank you. Yes. Lift every voice. I like that very much. Um, Okay, so we are going to have breakout rooms, which is pretty exciting because Ashley, Angela, Kathy, and Cynthia will all be offering to facilitate one. But I want to give Ashley, before we pop in there, got just a minute left in the schedule to, if there's something that you want to say before we pop into breakout rooms.
Sure. Just a couple of things. You said, what gives me hope? So, even in this very difficult political environment, Congress just launched their first bipartisan extreme heat caucus, led by Republican Mike Lawler in New York and Stanton in Arizona. It's a real recognition that there is bipartisan interest in this topic, even in this difficult political time. At the same time, World Economic Forum released a report in December. Morgan Stanley just released their own that showed that extreme heat will have enormous impact to the private sector. What this means, though, is that investment, private industry, they're going to start paying attention to this issue, how it affects their operations and supply chains and national security in those aspects. That means that there will be investment that follows. That gives me hope because communities they need investment, especially communities who have struggled with investment. The other is the shift in philanthropy that's happening, the shift in willingness and to invest in organizational structure because communities don't just need capital, they also need capacity. And so, so by the combination of sort of public policy, private sector, and philanthropy, we're starting to see some real momentum toward this issue. And so what I think the call for us to then is think about how can we be best ready to receive what comes next.
That's fantastic. Funding is a kind of a cog that has been sort of frustrating here and everywhere. So that's okay. We are moving. God is with us. And it is now time for breakout rooms. So as always, what we do is we launch the room and we allow people to choose what room they would like to go to. It's an opportunity to just have a casual conversation together with the facilitator in that room. It's pretty fun. A lot of people wait till the very last second to return. So I invite you to choose your breakout room. So welcome back, folks, as we're moving back. And I know from experience that lots of good things get shared in breakout rooms. And so what I want to do is, since we have an extra minute, does someone want to share about what the conversation was in their breakout room? If there's something particular that sort of stood out for them that they want to share?
Yes, I want to share Christine Goldie's question about church parking lots. At her church, they have an issue where their parking lot is across the street.
Oh,
And you can imagine how hard it is for people who are heat susceptible and people with disabilities to get from that distant parking lot to the sanctuary for worship or for other events. And she asked us if we knew if there were any churches that were dealing with that. They talked about having a shuttle for her church from the distant areas. But in reality, I have not heard of anybody who's been dealing with that. That doesn't mean they're not, but just that this seems to be a rising issue with the certainly United Methodist churches as our population grows older and our resources have diminished. How do we respond to something like that? Those infrastructure issues. And so that was a very important part of our conversation. And also Carl Gladstone raised a very good point about how the climate crisis is the issue for college students, high school students, the young folks who are wondering whether there's going to be a planet left to live on by the time they get to be grown-ups. And so was it you, Rashenda, who said we need to be rethinking our entire ministries as to how we live in the world as it is today? And that's kind of what framed the end of the conversation, So we didn't have very long time together, but I thought it was very fruitful.
Yeah, so this is begs the question, why do we have parking lots and all the infrastructure that goes with that, and how it is an expression of how we live unsustainably together. We got to get this worked out. The other challenge is it's not just how it is today, right, Cynthia? It's like today's just the starting place for what we're going to be seeing escalate. And so the lack of that centering spot, this is where we are, is going to also provide its own challenges. Anyone else would like to share what happened, in their breakout room? Angela, I'm looking at you, but I don't know if you want something to share about how that conversation went.
We were just talking about the resources that are available, and the ways that we will continue to be connecting with each other as we move on. And I just would say, on the note about parking lots, if our congregations are doing their accessibility audits, as the Book of Discipline says that we should be doing every year, then we'll see ideas around dealing with that and how perhaps offering a valet service for people, or offering, as Kathy noted in the chat, hybrid worship so people can choose to stay home when they need to, are ways to be battling that tension.
Absolutely. Fewer cars might help. But yes, all sorts of different things. So Ashley, there you are. I'm wondering if you would like to share a little bit about the conversation from your breakout group and how that went.
Sure. We talked a little bit about other efforts going on in Florida and North Carolina, cooling centers and other other groups that are forming to try and figure out how to address the issue in their communities. We also talked about, and some of the resources on our website, it's important that we think about what you do when you're exposed to heat and you don't have air conditioning, because this is not just, sometimes when you're exposed, you're not in a place like some of the stories we hear today where you can easily get to air conditioning, or you can't afford to adequately cool your house. So thinking about arm immersion and foot immersion and other kinds of, research has been really kind to us to tell us exactly how long you can do certain interventions to help, and where those thresholds are. And so we talked a little bit about those resources on our website that do that. We also helped develop we worked in North Carolina and developed a heat action plan template for every county in the state, and worked with the DHHS and State Climate Office to set the thresholds for those. That template is also available through our website. We've worked with the UN across the UN system and at the national, multinational, and subnational level. And those are also available on our website. So we talked a little bit about how you can get the resources to do the things that you want to do. That's a lot of our conversation.
Yeah, so now we have like 2 minutes, but I want to follow up with something that I read. So when I Ashley and I have never met in person, and I learned about Ashley and her work through this effort with Creation Justice, and was looking at she's being an academic, has all these published articles, and one of the things that she had was that you can't use fans. That fans are actually, once the heat gets hot enough, you can't just, be in an air conditioned room and put a fan on yourself or your grandmother.
Yep.
It's actually dangerous for them. And Ashley, can you give us a little bit of a tip about that, how we manage that and what that is?
I was going to see if I could share my screen for 2 seconds, I can show this resource, and that way it might just be fast. Okay, so this is on our website. So electric fans, at a certain degree, they actually just start to move around hot air, and they don't actually help you. So this shows you here in different groups of people at the temperatures at which it's no longer safe for fan use, and we're already at that point. Foot immersion is an incredibly successful an effective way to cool your core body temperature down, especially for those who don't have good mobility. You can put their feet over their ankles in a tub of cool water. It will lower your core body temperature about 5 degrees, about half a degree, sorry, for every 15 minutes of immersion or so. It also works for your arms, from your fingertips all the way over your elbows. This is what the U.S. Army uses as standard practice and basic training. I want to point out it's really important to stay hydrated, but once you start sweating, water is better used outside your body than in. That's really important. There are limitations to that. There are also limitations to evaporative coolers. If you live in the Southeast like I do and you use an evaporative cooler, you're just introducing more humidity to the air and making it harder for you to cool your body down. So really thinking about how you can use water strategically outside your body, whether you take a cool shower, where you wet a shirt, put it on your body, you strategically place cool rags around your neck, under your armpits, or in your groin, or immerse your feet or your ankles. This is all available and free on our website, and we have some versions in Spanish language too. These are all really important tactics that you can use when you don't have air conditioning.
Thank you, Ashley. I think that's really, really helpful, kind of a takeaway there. We are at time, and it's been absolutely marvelous to have this conversation. I'm so grateful to Cynthia and Ashley and Angela for being here. And Kathy, of course, is the center point of many of the emails. She monitors that email address and is marvelous to, if you have a question and a follow-up, email Creation Justice. There is going in the chat right now, and Kathy will be there to help sort you into your houses or whatever it is you need, answer questions. She's I just can't say enough about working with Kathy. She's awesome. And so another awesome person to work with, Dawn, part of our Café team, she is going to be praying us out. And it's time for our goodbye. So go ahead, Dawn.
Thank you, Reshinda, and thank you so much to all the presenters. You guys did a wonderful job, and I'm very grateful for your time. Okay, let's just go ahead and we'll pray out. So here we go. Merciful God, we turn to you in this time of extreme heat and climate crisis. We acknowledge our role in the environmental challenges we face and the suffering they cause. We are so grateful for those who came and presented today and the lessons and knowledge that we learned from them. But now we pray for those who are most vulnerable to the heat, especially the elderly, the young, those with disabilities, those with pre-existing conditions, and outdoor workers. Grant all of us the relief from the heat and protection from illness. We pray for those battling wildfires and other climate-related disasters. Give them strength, courage, and safety. And we also pray for wisdom and guidance for our leaders to enact policies that will protect our planet and its inhabitants. Help us to be responsible stewards of your creation and to work together for a more sustainable and definitely more just future. Amen.